welcome podcast. No, we'll call it Rabbit Trails Nation. We need to start an identity around this
Rabbit Trails
podcast. Garrick, it's great to see you, man. Happy Tuesday afternoon.
It's good to see you.
This is Tuesday, right?
Yeah, it's
my kids are out of school.
It is that time of year. Kids are out of school. Yes,
I've lost track of everything in life.
Myself as well. I'm not sure what day it is. I know I've got some work to do, and the kids have got to be fed. That's about it.
Pretty much life has been simplified to a wonderful pace. That's what the summer's all about. Yeah. Well, Garrick, man, it's been a while since you and I talked. We recorded a couple of podcasts, and then I got busy with Swedish midsummer celebrations, which were rather lame this year, given the fact that coronavirus canceled them. So we spent it out at a lake, but hey, of the 100,000 lakes that there are in Sweden, spending at one of them is not a bad way to have to spend it.
Yeah, that sounds
nice.
Nice.
How is Spain?
Spain is hot. It's getting hot, but things are going well with coronavirus, and cases are down quite a bit. But yeah, things are good.
Good. Our small talk right now is just really terrible, man. We're gonna have to have for this podcast.
I know.
All right, well, let's save us from terrible terrible small talk. Sam Perez is our guest today, and I know Sam a little bit. You know Sam a lot better. But I tell you what, the conversations that I have had with Sam over the intervening years have always been fantastic. Have always been deep. I find in Sam a kindred spirit. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Garrick, for the folks that don't know Sam, since you know Sam best, why don't you go ahead and introduce Sam a little bit?
Yeah. So I've known Sam for a long time, like 15 years. And so I've worked with Sam for pretty much 15 years in some capacity. And unfortunately, he recently took a call into the Anglican priesthood, but before that, he was a student leader and then a staff and director, local director for Agape Spain in Granada, where I live as well. And so we've just been great friends for a long time, for 15 years. And I'm always blessed to talk to him and listen to him and basically bounce ideas off of each other. Sam is, as you said, a very deep guy. He is I think a natural theologian. And people, okay, so, a lot of people
pressure,
say,
Sam.
I think he's a natural theologian, but a lot of our theology, if a lot of theologians say, well, your theology is also a lot about who you are. And Sam has probably one of the most interesting stories, like histories of his life that I know. He's just a fascinating person. When he comes on here in a second, you're going to go, that guy's not Spanish, but he's Andalusian, which is my favorite part of Spain. The best part of Spain, where there's real art and passion. And he is from deep in the heart of Andalusia, with some mixing things in there. He's got a family. He's right now coming to us from Cambridge, where he's studying. And so Sam, introduce yourself. Give us some more background and about who you are, and what God's been doing in your life the last 15 or so years.
Thank you so much, Gary, for that lovely, wonderful introduction. At points, I wasn't sure if you were talking about me, really. That's very good, and I feel very flattered. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Sam, and as Gary said, I had the privilege of having. I have worked with Garrick, and of course with Barry in the distance, but with Garrick more closely for 15 years. And Garrick, you've been more than just a colleague for me. You know that Garrick has been my spiritual father as well in many ways, and he continues being a great friend, a great source of inspiration, and it's a guy that I look up for. So I really do feel very honored to be here with you, Rabbiters. Just to add more of the terminology there.
There you go. Maybe that's better than Rabbit Trails Nation.
But yes, no, I was involved and proud to be involved with the ministry of Crew and Agape in Europe, where I was recently thinking about something that a monk that I was listening to said, there's a sort of a universal understanding that we all want to belong, we all want to feel loved, and we all want to be known. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, I had all that. I grew in Agape, in my ministry in Granada. I belong to these people, and they belong to me in many ways. In that mystical body of the church, really, we were church. We were, in a very tangible way, we were being Christ to one another. We were loved. That doesn't mean that we did not argue, that we didn't, that we saw eye to eye all the time whatsoever, but precisely because that was the point, and that there were times of, sorry, there's a bit of traffic there, because we were loving each other, we could honestly embrace conflict in healthy ways, and we did that, as well as rejoicing and celebrating. That's one of the things that I learned most from Garrick, really. Celebrating good times, and I think that's not just Garrick, it's the whole culture that we have in Agape, really, but certainly in Granada we had that. We celebrate the big shots and the big goals and everything. It's a culture of celebration, which is the gospel, really. And we are known. We know Garrick and his wife Zeu and everyone there in Granada know me. They have seen me at my lowest, and they see me at my highest. And so, by way of introduction, I'm just a random southerner from Spain who happened to land in Granada and found their family there. I developed, in many ways. I grew there. I read my degree at the University of Granada. I'm an English philologist. And yes, life has taken me elsewhere. I am extremely liturgical. I feel liturgically oriented by nature, really. And that's one of the things that really pushed me to listen into the inklings of the Lord in my heart, to look into other venues. I was in a wonderful place of ministry. As Garrett mentioned before, I was local director, and my influence was very palpable, really. And yet, it was at that time that I felt the Lord is leading me and saying, it's time for you to say goodbye to your family and be more conformed to me. And so I left where I belonged and where I was known and loved, to a broader family where I sometimes belong, not always. So I'm loved by some people and not by everyone, of course, because not everyone knows me. And I am known to certain degrees, but not really deeply. And so that's really what brought me here to Cambridge to read a degree at the University of Cambridge that I'm currently doing on theology. And I'm also being trained for ordained ministry as hopefully in the future to be a vicar or a priest in Church of England. Yes, I don't know if that, as a way of introduction, that suffices.
Yeah. So. No, that's
Sam,
great. And
Sam, because Garrick knows a lot of the story, but because I don't know a lot of the story, I'm going to throw in a question. What now? You grew up in the Catholic Church, from what I remember, and how does a Catholic from the south of Spain end up training to be a vicar in the Church of England?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's I'm sure that's a long journey, but I'm sure I know it's also an interesting one. And I think that there are a couple of key people who play cameos in that. Was it Nicky Gumbel as well as N.T. Wright?
Yes, to a certain degree, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, lay on us a little bit of that story.
Yes, I was Catholic, but being from a village called La Linea in the very south of Spain, being so close to the Rock of Gibraltar, and as we know, the Rock of Gibraltar belongs to Britain. There's always been that subculture in my village, in which we do things very different to the rest of Spain. I go to the beach, for instance, to give you an example, and I drink hot tea with milk at the beach, which apparently no one does in Spain, really. In the rest
but
of
that
Spain.
Was a normal thing in your village?
That was very normal. We had afternoon tea.
I had no idea.
I grew up with afternoon tea, and it's not odd, and it's not a British thing. It's what we do in La Linea, really. And it's, of course, because of the influence of that culture there. We have many different jargon as well there. that are very much influence of English into Spanish. So it's really a subculture that's very unique. So while I'm very much Spanish and I'm very proud to be that way, and Catholic, in my walking with the Lord, really, especially when I entered university and I was more interested in my faith and going deeper, I started questioning what I believed and why I believed it. Then in Spain, you by definition are Roman Catholic already. And so you go along with the traditions and culture, which are wonderful, don't take me wrong. But I happened to stumble upon questions in my life in which I didn't have answers in the Catholic faith. And so long story short, as a staff in Agape, I entered into Agape as a Catholic. I was one of the first few Catholics in Spain to be part of the team. I took great pride of that. Really, I was like, wow, I'm Catholic, and everywhere I would go in the States, for instance, I would just say, well, yes, I'm with crew, but I'm Catholic, just so you know, just you know what you're buying into, as it were. And so it was very interesting that the more I would say that to people, the more something was changing in my heart. And then one day, in my praying time, the Lord was really determined to show me how much Catholic I was. And so he said, well, let's see how Catholic you really are, Sam, because you don't really believe in these doctrines and that doctrine, and you don't really abide to that and this. Are you really Catholic? And I have to agree with what my wife has been telling me for years by that time, which is, you're not really Catholic, are you? And so, so,
had she really been telling you that?
She was, in a way,
awesome.
you're Catholic, but you're not really Catholic. And I would grab my Catholic rosary and storm out and say, yes, I am, and knock on the door. So again, it was a discovery. I really realized at some point that my denomination as a Catholic had become my idol. It was bigger than being a Christian and bigger than following Christ, really. And so with this, I mean that there's nothing wrong. That I don't mean there's nothing wrong with the Catholic Church, but I personally did not identify myself there, and so I was in the right platform, which was in many ways Agape, to endeavor and to try to understand what was going on in me. But again, that sense of belonging that we all have, that is very strong in my heart. And so I needed the surname. I'm Christian, good, but I need a surname. I said, why? If I'm not Catholic, what am I? And so, other people like my wife, for instance, they feel comfortable being just Christians, followers of Christ. That's all you need. Yeah. And that's absolutely fine. But I was thinking, yes, but there are other Christians, followers of Christ, that are not particularly aligned with what I believe. In fact, they stand in corners in some parts of the world, shaming and insulting other people for whatever reason. And so I don't identify with those Christians. I need my surname. And theologically, I'm, as Garrett said, I'm very theologically oriented as well. And so I needed to know, well, I don't want to align myself with these other branch of the family. So I want that other. And so I was entering a very difficult time in my life in which I was really reaching depressive tones of my living, really. It was a big question. Where do I belong? What branch of the family? And at that time I was in Colorado, in the States. And so I was just, I had the opportunity, because of the nature of my being there, I had the opportunity to visit many churches. And this day I was going to present our ministry of Granada to a church. And they said, well, why don't you stay afterwards, after our meeting, to our prayers, midday prayers? I said, oh, sure, I would love to. And so I entered into that prayer, and it was wonderful because it was very liturgical. It looked a lot to what I was used to, but yet it was, in a way, something that was not Catholic. And so I was like, oh, and that church was Anglican. I had lived before here in England, in Nottingham and in Crewe, in the county of Cheshire, and I never really was interested in the Catholic and the Anglican Church. But that sparked in me something that after that I got interested in knowing more, and so I started reading more about the Anglican Church, what they believe, how they came about, and all this. And it got to a point where I said, I need to talk to someone. And I have no idea who to talk to. And so Alpha Courses, very well known, Nikki Gumbel came to mind. And so I was thinking, well, I'm going to email Nikki Gumbel and see what happens. And sure enough, I contacted Nikki Gumbel. He was so gracious. He actually answered me.
Wow.
Out of all the million emails that he's got. He answered me, and I was able to talk to him very briefly, and he appointed me to by that time, dean of theological college. Now he's a bishop, actually. And I had a Skype appointment with this dean, and I was asking all these sort of questions. And eventually, a few months later, I was able to feel confident to embrace the Anglican communion. It was a process of grieving my denomination, because again, it was taking away an idol from me, and entering to this family, which is very broad, which I love. However, it's not always what I like. And so it's also challenging sometimes to love my brother and sister, even within the same denomination. And that for me was a clear sign that I was where I was supposed to be. And so in this struggling and wrestling with my other brothers and sisters in the same denomination, I was able to contact N.T. Wright and ask him. I've contacted him several times. One was just to ask him about books, theological books, and he answered right away. And then I've emailed, exchanged correspondence with him a couple of times more, in which I was actually addressing these issues. And I don't agree with this strand, and it's very difficult. How do you, your pastoral care, he was a former bishop, so how do you, what do you suggest? What do you encourage me? And he was very gracious and very kind to really encourage me to walk in patience and love to my brothers and sisters, because the reality is none of us have the perfect theology, the perfect doctrine, and we've got to figure out. So we're all in this together.
You know, that's actually, this is a small comment on N.T. Wright, but that's something that's always seemed to impress me about him, is his, here he's one of the world's foremost theologians, and arguing could be his, you know, in his back pocket at any given point, and he could make anyone feel little and everything else. And he seems to be an incredibly generous person towards others, towards people who have different views, and he genuinely loves Jesus. That has been impressed upon me, whether it be interviews or whatever else. I actually, we more or less a couple of weeks ago we had on Michael Meditol, and Michael texted me one day, and he said, hey, you want to go have lunch with N.T. Wright? And I was like, yes. And he had been emailing him back and forth on some things, and had said, hey, you know, I would love to. He was actually trying to get him to supervise a PhD, I think, at one point, and he wasn't taking any more people or anything. And anyway, but he said, hey, if you're ever in up in St. Andrews, look me up. I'd love to talk with you more. So Michael texted me immediately and said, you want to go to St. Andrews? And so we I'm sure this won't make it back to N.T. Wright, but anyway, so then a couple of weeks later, he contacted him and said, actually, I think I will be passing through. Would you be up for meeting for lunch? And he said, absolutely. So we took N.T. Wright out to lunch and had a 2-hour lunch meeting with N.T. Wright. It was incredible. And he's a really gracious man. So,
and didn't he, how did he excuse himself, Barrett? Didn't he say, like, I got to go finish a book or something like that?
Yeah. He was like, well, guys, I'm sorry. I need to go finish a book.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, yes.
Yeah, and surprisingly, it's sold millions of copies.
Yeah, but the thing is, he's a great theologian, and that shows it, the great charity with which he actually engages with other opinions and other points of view, generally speaking.
Yeah.
That shows that he's a good theologian. It's something that even here I'm learning. One of the things that they constantly reminding us on theological college is to be charitable to the ideas of other people and how to refute them. Because we can all, it's very easy to fall into downtrodden someone's point of view and say, well, you're wrong and that's stupid and that. No, these people have, most of them devoted years of study. They have things to say. So charity, in that sense, academic charity, is a key component of a good theologian, and he definitely has that.
Yeah, he really does. Yeah. He's you know, he actually, I keep going back to the well of that lunch time and time again, and one of the things that I walked away from that lunch was, we were asking him about, which I'd love to get some of your opinion on here in a minute, Sam, but we were asking him about kind of the situation in Europe. And I think Michael asked him, are you a pessimist or an optimist concerning kind of the church and the state of Christianity in Europe? And he looked at me and he looked at us and he said, I'll quote Leslie Newbegin. And my first thought was, world's foremost theologian is quoting someone else. I'm kind of ticked off, you know? And he said, I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist. Jesus is risen from the dead.
Yeah.
And I just keep going back to that. I was like, yeah, that really changes everything. And then as he was leaving, we were shaking hands, thanking him. And he said, Michael actually asked him, he said, so do you and your wife ever talk about stuff like this? And he goes, no, he said, the only thing my wife wants to know is, does this make me a better husband? And I thought that was he's just a very human response. So anyway, but yeah.
Here in Cambridge, we're privileged to having many great theologians as well. And when I go often running along the River Cam, I pass by Magdalen College, which is where Bishop Rowan Williams lived as the principal there, and his wife, Dr. Jane Williams. And sometimes I see them there along the river as well. And I often wonder what they talk about, because they're great, brilliant titles of theology. And I was thinking, I wonder they're contemplating about Pseudo Dionysius and his, or Irenaeus.
They're quoting Chaucer to each other.
You know, I was thinking, always wondering that. What are they talking about? Maybe they're just talking about doing the shopping at Sainsbury's. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I wonder why the cheese has gone up 6 pence.
Yeah.
Indeed. It's just,
there's
There's
a poem in there or a short story.
Yeah, no kidding.
So Sam, real quick, a few things I think we can start kind of, I think would be interesting to explore. But number one, I do want you to introduce your wife and kids because, you know, that's
absolutely. Yes, I am married to wonderful Rebecca, who was also staff with Crew for more years than I was, actually, for about 15 more years, actually. And now she's the director of a small group, school, home education school sort of way, co-op, in the area here in Cambridge. And I've got 3 children, Alex, Robert, and Kayla. They're wonderful. They're learning a lot, and I love them to bits. I cannot really be more blessed with these kids. They're wonderful in all sense. And I'm very proud to be their father.
What is the language of your home, within your home? Do you guys go back and forth between Spanish and English? Because Rebecca she speaks Spanish as well.
She does. She's a Spanish major, but we speak English aloud.
Okay. Well, you have such a wonderful posh accent. I mean, why wouldn't you? I have no idea what your accent sounds like in Spanish, but
it's very southerner. Very southerner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sam speaks better English than I do.
I think he does. Yeah.
And he speaks he has if you ever get him together with someone else from Cadiz, because Malenia is in the province of Cadiz, or Americans would think, what did I say? Cadiz, but we say Cadiz in Spain. Right. It can be sometimes a very thick and intimidating accent sometimes. Including the first time I was actually in Cadiz for like a vacation. We were at the beach and we were at a restaurant, and we just only been in Spain for a couple of years, or not very long. And we were wondering, what language are all these people speaking here? This is very strange. There's a lot of foreigners here. And then after a while, I realized, oh no, they were Spanish. They were from that village, but we just hadn't accustomed our ears to that level of accent.
So what is it about the southern parts of countries that make accents so much more thick or different? Like in Sweden, the southern part of Sweden has a very special accent. It seems like that's like this weird thing. Like the southern parts of countries tend to have strange accents, or not strange, but thicker accents, or unique, wonderful accents. Anyway, I don't know. Okay, so do your kids speak Spanish at all?
They do actually. Okay. Yes, they speak to my parents in Spanish. And,
okay.
And when we joke around, really, we speak Spanish.
Okay.
When I'm teasing them, I speak Spanish to them because they know I'm joking. I'm not really serious. If I tell them something in Spanish, to not touch something or something like that, they know that I'm not really meaning it. It's a joke language. But if I said it in English, they know, oh, I'm serious.
That's hilarious. So you just see Spanish as a joke language? Is that what you're saying?
In a way, yes.
I don't know what your fellow Spaniards think about that.
Life is too hard to speak Spanish and be taken seriously, really.
That's awesome. Okay, so Sam, Garrick, you may have questions or thoughts, but I'm gonna throw out something here, and then feel free to change.
And hold on, I do.
Okay,
I do, but this has got nothing. We're getting into the meat of things. Although I do, at some point, we need to make a reference to talk about the language in Gibraltar.
Oh yes,
that's it's kind of a thing.
Let's do that now then, because I'm
Sam and I have this kind of both a fascination in Gibraltar and the language they speak, and it's kind of an ongoing thing we have. So yeah,
I know that it's different, but let me play ignorant and ask, what's the deal with the language in Gibraltar?
Well, I'll start, and then Sam, you fill in the gaps. But on one hand, everyone there speaks very nice British, so you'll go there and you'll hear them. You'll be sitting next to someone and they'll be speaking English and with an accent. You're like, oh, well, that's very nice. And then immediately they'll switch into almost an Andalusian, or really a very strict. So they go back between the two languages.
Okay.
And then they have some kind of a language that's a part of that, right? Also, Sam, that kind of is developed from the two. So
absolutely, yes. It's sort of a native, in the same way that we have a language like Chicano language in the States, or Spanglish, more close to that. Spanglish. There's Spanglish version, as it were, in which they alter both languages, actually, Spanish and English, and they put Spanish words into English when they speak in English, and they put English words when they speak in Spanish. And also the structures too. There are things, for instance, I call you back. When you say I call you back to someone in English, it's perfectly fine. It's perfect English, a phrasal verb, I call you back. Yet in Spanish, that would not even make sense. It's like, you are walking backwards as you call him. That doesn't make sense. Well, they say that. They say, te llamo para atrás. And we say, wait. And they'd say it without an accent.
Really?
So, it doesn't make sense. I mean, as a linguist, I love it in that sense. But as a true Spaniard from La Linea, I very much despise that. I said, they're ruining the languages.
Yeah. So isn't that in some sense, we're gonna get letters for this comment, but isn't that in some sense some kind of linguistic appropriation? Like, they're just stealing a language, man. Not in a bad way. Not in a bad way. I'm joking. Sorry.
You have to understand culture, the history. That really shows the history of that very small area. The border closed, and some Spaniards actually got locked down in Gibraltar for years. Families were not able to see each other, and so of course they started marrying and living their lives there in Gibraltar. So by definition, their children were British citizens with Spanish passports, and they would speak that weird language, really, that they have there. They understand each other perfectly. But if you are an outsider, even an English person coming, or a Brit coming to Gibraltar, they would not understand, because they use these coordinates that really doesn't make sense.
That's funny, because in some ways, I feel like you're describing my home right now, right? Because my kids live in both Swedish and English, and sometimes the way our syntax ends up working, whether it be when we're speaking, their syntax is much better than that, but there is syntax kind of we'll co-opt things, or I said something the other day, I forget what it was, or we just drop. We'll do that. We'll be speaking English, but frankly, the Swedish word. In our home, for some reason, we never say cucumber. We only say gurka, which gurka is the Swedish word for cucumber. But I think because it's shorter, it just works better. It rolls off the tongue easier than cucumber. Like, it's just this really, anyway. So anyone who listens to us kind of goes, people laugh a lot of times, because they're like, why are you like throwing these Swedish words? Or we'll take a Swedish word, and sometimes we'll add an ed on the end of a Swedish verb, because it's like, well, I wanted the verb because I like the connotation of that verb, but I don't really want to speak the Swedish sentence. And so so we just completely my kids, I bet their language teachers at school really don't like them.
That's wonderful.
Anyway, that's really fascinating. Yeah, Gibraltar's I think that's the thing, though. I think that as an American, so many Americans will say something like, well, in Europe, and it's kind of like, we don't say, it's really hard to say, like, I realized when I left America, when people would say, what's America like? And I started realizing, well, you can't just say what's America like. You kind of have to say, well, what's your cultural background? What region of the country do you live in? Like, you have to start putting all these pieces together. And you realize that Europe's kind of the same way, even though it's a lot older and those patterns are a lot more traditional and everything else. But to say that Europe is this way or Spain is this way, there's so many villages like drinking hot tea on the beach with milk in it. That's just fascinating. So on a hot day, Sam, do you still drink hot tea with milk?
I am very famous for being at the beach and desiring, if only I could have a blanket here and a warm cup of tea with milk in it. Wow. At the beach, at the shore.
That's awesome.
So I do think that,
Wow. Okay. Well, okay. So I'm anxious to get your opinion on a couple of things here. Garrick and I spent a lot of time talking about kind of the state of, well, it goes back to a little bit of that question that we posed to N.T. Wright. The idea, really thinking through, you being former Agape staff, crew staff, I think you know the world, the waters that we swim in a little bit. So I'm try to set up this question as best I can. What is, as you have gone on your faith journey from, student, following Jesus, Catholic, crew staff, Anglican, towards the priesthood or vicarhood, what is your general sense of the state of things? Call it spirituality, we'll call it what you want, in Europe. And I realize I just said Europe, you can't say is one thing, but as best you can. What is your general sense at the moment of things? And then I have a couple follow-up questions to that, but Garrick, feel free to also jump in.
I can certainly speak from my experience in England. I can't really refer to the rest of Europe, really. Although I can have an intuition.
I was going to try to get you to comment on Flanders, but okay.
Just kidding. It's fascinating for me to see how things that did not work in Spain does not work in England either. For instance, even among students, talking openly about Jesus and the gospel, people assume, I know what that is, I'm not interested. Generally speaking, it seems to be a change now, because there's more generations that did not grow up with that latent Christian culture. But certainly that's been my experience. And it's very much here as well in England. They have Church of England, the institutional church. And so we all know if I want to know about God, I just go to the church right there in the corner. And I talk to the vicar about it, if I am interested. But guess what? I'm not really interested.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have an interest in Jesus. And so I'm noticing more aversion, as it were, to that flat out gospel, as it were, of approaching people in that way, as opposed to really genuinely caring for the individual that I have in front of me, knowing their story and where they are. I believe that God is touching everyone's life, really. And so where God is leading this person and where they are, it's really an invitation for me to listen to that story. And so that's something that is also here in England, in their stories. Even old-timers, churchgoers that I've talked to, that I would say, well, if I started as an ordinand in a church talking to them about Jesus, they would turn off. It's like, well, no, don't bring me with the gospel. I'm not interested. I'm here to church not to hear about the gospel, really. I'm here to talk about the flower arrangement or whatever, But if I'm actually interested in their story, where they are, and genuinely have an interest in what God is doing in their lives, then that Jesus gains a different perspective. It's not the Jesus of the book. And certainly here in Cambridge, we do have many things of the book. It's more the Jesus that I know in my heart and that you live with. And so let's walk together. And so it's all about stories, really. And then something that I'm noticing here more than perhaps in my context in Spain is social action. I am very well known here for being very conformist. As well, I come from a Catholic background. The magisterium is there latent somewhere. And so I don't have to figure out things, just it's given for me. but also it's a social action for injustices, and we're living it now these days with so many things. Unfortunately, the whole hashtag Black Lives Matters, it really is very much of a deal here, and rightly so, by all means. I do love that, and I think it's long overdue, and we should have done that before. But still, it's very present in England as a social action. And if you're a Christian, you really need to put your heads there, and you need to get involved. Otherwise, there's no Christianity really, and that goes without saying somewhat in Christian spheres.
What do you? So okay, so you're saying that Christians within England are very social active. How do non-Christians view Christians in England?
They can be disruptive sometimes. Not every Christian, of course, that's also to be said. Not every Christian are very active. I mean, the 80-year-old grandma who goes to church to pray morning prayer, she's not going to go out, generally speaking. There are some cases, go out on demonstrations and strikes and things like that. But it's true that at least in this culture of Cambridge, there's a lot of activism. And so it's disruptive sometimes. It's seen as a disruption. And that is perceived by Christians as a good thing. We're disrupting the establishment for the sake of justice because it's a Christian duty. So that's something very, for me as an outsider, very telling, because when in my context in Spain, that's always been by the radicals, atheists, in some context of Spain. But whereas in here in England, is the Christian does that. The lefties are the Christians who actually do that. And so it's very telling for me as a non-left and non-conservative guy who just come in and said, all right, it's something that for me is challenging and it's good. It's a good challenge. You say, how as a white man, how am I going to engage, for instance, in this case about Black lives? What is the maximum I can do at this point? And whatever that may be, am I going to do it? And those things are latent in the conversations all the time.
Yeah. When you think back to your time, or I guess your journey, where has the Lord, I think, challenged you the most in, or some significant areas of challenge that you have, I think, looking back, you would say, wow, I've changed my view on that, or I'm understanding Christ in a different way. Let's say today compared to 10 years ago, in relationship to the way you interact with people in, let's say, I'll throw out several terms for it. We'll call it evangelism. We'll call it sharing your faith. We'll call it engaging non-believers. There's lots of ways to say it, and I put those out there, well, because various people find very other terms helpful. But anyway, so where are some areas that you feel like you've changed within say the past, however many years, 10 years or whatever else?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. I think originally, without much experience or knowledge, I had my mindset of evangelism was just to go out and share the gospel in very overt ways, very flat out ways to people. And I don't care whether they receive it well or not. That's my duty and I have to do it. And I'm not saying there is no room for that. But I have, with time, discovered in my experience that what I've noticed people being, what I've noticed on people is actually shutting down to Christianity because of my doing that. And so,
how do you mean?
Well, not just the fact that people got angry and left, but really, some other people that
that's a good sign that they're shutting down.
Yes, it's a very good sign to these people. But there are other instances in which I've done that with people that I already knew, that I have a relation of friendship, a connection, and then you see how gradually that relationship deteriorates. And the only reason you can really justify for that is really that instance in which you said that Jesus loved this person and they can have the opportunity to repent and accept it. Now, the message and the way in which it's said is different. The message, I don't think, ever changes or should change. The way in which I have approached that in different times of my ministry and my experience has changed, and it has proven to be more fruitful, as it were, because there's been more dialogue, there's been more conversation, and at the end of the day, more openness from that person. I have friends that I have taken another approach to share the gospel with them, and even to this day, while they claim to be very proud atheists, whenever they travel, whenever they get on a plane, they say, "Sam, I'm actually on a journey. I'm actually going to go back to wherever. Pray for my flight. Pray for my exam." And that, of course, is not a change. It's not like I say, "Well, now there's Christian, jolly good," but rather it's an approach of engaging in a long distance conversation, really, that will take that person and me into a different venue in which God really is going to come more real than just a tick on the box, as it were. So to come to the term of what we were talking initially, pilgrimage, I think that's the best way for me to describe any intentional outreach with the gospel. And I think anyone can do that. I dread with the idea of going to someone and talking bluntly about the gospel. I have done it, and if I had to do it, I would do it, but I dread with it, that idea of doing that. Whereas if I say, here's an opportunity to get to know someone, to actually become friends, and out of that friendship to give them, him or her, the best you can have, and the best I have is the gospel, then it is different. It might take, normally in my case, it does take longer. It does take more time from my part, more effort. It actually takes me listening to their story. And sometimes, to be honest, I don't really want to, and it's a bit difficult. But it really helps to understand, because in that engagement already, there's also the Lord talking to me through that person. And that I've experienced so many times. It's like, oh yeah, that he's saying, that's me all over. And it's not me all over as jolly good, you've done a great thing, but rather that's something you need to confess to. That's something that you need to be walking with and repent from me. And then I engage in a different platform with that person. That is not he or she is the sinner and I am the saved one, but rather we are both in the same boat. It's just that I happen to be having one leg on the other boat, and hey, let's jump together because we really are struggling here.
Or as Luther said, one beggar showing another beggar where to find food.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's probably a way. My personality is, I'm a pretty straightforward, let's say, kind of person. I like preaching, but over the years, I've learned and softened that the sharing of faith has actually become sharing. It has become being more interested in the person's story, who they are, where they've come from, what they're doing. And I actually think that in today's, we talk a lot about postmodern, liquid modern world that we're in, whether it be Spain, whether it be Sweden, whether it be the UK. It doesn't mean that we don't. I think, and I'd like to know your opinion on this, it doesn't mean that we don't share the gospel. I think a lot of times when people hear talk like this, the knee-jerk reaction, or at least let's say from backgrounds or certain circles like that we have come from or we are in, there can be that knee-jerk reaction to think that, what do you mean, you're telling me not to talk about Jesus? And it's actually the opposite. It's just you're thinking about it in a very different way to draw the conversation out. It actually becomes a conversation. It actually becomes listening. It becomes sharing, like literally taking part in someone's life in a way that is meaningful, that is a lot of work, but actually can be a lot more enjoyable. It doesn't have to be as confrontational. I'm sure you get into disagreements, but you get into maybe more meaningful disagreements. So for example, one way to put it was, well, I can't speak for y'all, but there have been times where me and my wife have disagreed. I know that doesn't happen in y'all's marriage, but it certainly happens from time to time. We've been married 13 years, so about once a year we get into a disagreement. And but that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean I just go to my wife and I create, a number of bullet points. I've done that before. It never goes well. That's not a style of argumentation to develop a relationship and one of meaningful purpose, Yeah. So I love what you're saying there.
I have a question to you in relation to that, because Sam, when I think us working together, I think oftentimes we felt our role was to create a context where those things that you were talking about could happen for people. Mm-hmm. And in Spain, that was always community. We tried to build community because it's a communal family culture. So if you want to launch off of what Barrett said, but also I'm interested in how that difference from now a northern European situation where maybe community, maybe not. I don't know. That's where I don't know. And obviously, the UK is a multicultural society as well, mm-hmm. So there's going to be some different things going on there. I'm just wondering, what you think about that.
The sense of belonging, I think, is everywhere. It's universal, and that is also present here in England. It might change the venues in which that grouping happens, of course, but in southern Spain we have the confraternities, in the Catholic parishes, mm-hmm. and they go with the boats with the Virgin Mary and Christ and all that in Holy Week. That's a community right there. Yeah. The same thing we have here. It's just not for thrones and statues, but there is the Guild of Bell Ringers, the flower arrangement committee that I talked about before. There's still those traditional things that unite people. Albeit they are somewhat conservative and traditional, but they are. And now that with this pandemic situation, is forcing the whole structure of the whole makeup of society really to recalibrate and to figure out how are we going to engage in community and what other communities are going to flourish from here. And so we're seeing that in different Zoom meetings, different Zoom groups that are popping up from praying communities to other type of community just to talk. We have here at Theological College a licensed bar that we use on Thursday nights. And now throughout the pandemic time, we really have not been able to use it. Well, we created a Zoom bar, and so people just get their own beverage and they talk. That shows to me that we all designed for community, really. We just drawn to that. And I always think that gospel and gospel proclamation happens best in a context of a community, in a context of a church. And it really does happen here too. I mean, whether it is in a 800-year-old temple or outside in the street or in the supermarket, it doesn't really matter that much, as opposed to this is the community really that's taking place. And we're seeing it more palpable now these days.
So this is maybe, I don't know, we kind of go into the realm of apologetics, but something I've been thinking a lot about lately is there is a tendency to, in the societies that we live in particular, where people want the kingdom without the king. Okay, so we recognize, we're community-based people, and therefore I can have a community with my antique car club. That's one that's popular in Sweden among a certain segment of population. Or there's all these different, community of underwater basket weavers, or tea drinking beachgoers. So obviously the church provides deep, meaningful community, and I would all the way from Catholic and Anglican community all the way to low church Pentecostal home church sort of stuff. I mean, there's community there of varying degrees and varying purpose. What is, and I'll throw this question out to both of y'all, but it's something I've been trying to parse out lately, other than, well, yeah, you can't have the full meaningful depths of community without Jesus. Okay, fine. I think that's the answer, but parse it out a little bit more. How would y'all answer that question to someone who throws that out there? Well, you've got your church. I've got my underwater basket weaving, tea drinking, beachgoers club. I've said.
Okay, do you want to answer?
Sam's pointing to me. Well, I mean, obviously the core is that the church is centered around a resurrected Savior, and so I think I think we have to be careful. We're not trying to say we're exclusive in the sense we're the only community that matters. All those other communities matter and are important and are reflective of who God is. Right? God is community in the Trinity, and so we are social people. We're called to be in community with others. But the organization, if you want to call it an organization, or the community or the family, that will bring in the kingdom of God and will bring in salvation for all people, and maybe, and this is the great thing of the church. What is Bono saying in one of his songs? Blessings even for the ones who don't kneel, or he says blessings for the ones who don't kneel, luckily, right? So even as a church, we bless people beyond the bounds of our community in many, many ways. So we are, I think, and we are the people indwelled with the power of the Holy Spirit. So there is a certain kind of maybe unity. Now, do we always achieve that? Do we always land on that? Not always. Sometimes we fail, but that's the theological reality, I think, of who we are. And so I think that then beckons us not only to preach the gospel, but to call people to come join this community in some way. Does that sound good?
Yes. On that note, also, it really reiterates that a Christian community does not depend on humans, in that what creates that Christian community is not how many members you have in that community, but rather that this focus and the center is Christ, and the focus and the goal is to worship Him. Of course, by that doesn't mean that other groups and stuff are horrible. Of course not. I mean, those of us who like drinking tea, we love and we find life in drinking tea at the beach. But is that the point and the focus? The focus is the tea. It's not really the life-giving Christ. And so that's one of the things that I find most helpful in my liturgical setting is, however badly the liturgy is, or however low church, high church, or whatever, at the end of the day, it's an encounter with God, which I know that encounter is an encounter with the source of life, the life that fills me to the most. Yes, drinking tea at the beach does give me life, but it's momentary, and it's not forever and lasting. The other one is beyond that, and actually I can do that while drinking tea at the beach. It doesn't have to be, particularly in certain structures.
Yeah, so I think that's you raise a couple of really good points that, as y'all were talking, I was thinking about. So the late Ravi Zacharias was fond of saying that only God is the perpetual novelty, because He's the only thing that can't be exhausted. He is endless, and so drinking tea on the beach, while pleasant and beautiful and tasty, ultimately will run out of novelty. It'll run out of its, you will plumb the depths of it eventually. Now, right. if you're just looking to it for meaning or purpose or enjoyment, but rather when you go to God, and this is where I think a Christian community comes in, because within the Christian community, you can eat and you can drink, and you can then praise the one who has given that, right? So it's it's not that it brings a second level of depth. It helps you to understand the full meaning of it. So one way of pointing it out would be anyone can walk the Camino. Okay. But there are signposts along the way that if you understand, it's leading you in a direction and for a purpose and for a reason. And at the end of that, there's a goal, or there's a person who set out to put those signposts and to point toward a greater good or whatever else. And I think a lot of these clubs and, let's say, secularized community that we have are fantastic. I think I grew up. Yeah, I think I grew up. No, I think I grew up, thinking that secular people were always miserable, and so it was a very difficult thing to find out that, especially when you come to Sweden, there's a lot of really happy secular people. And so, how do you wrap your head around if the message you've believed is secular people because they don't have the gospel are miserable, and they go, well, actually, I'm fine.
Some of them are incredibly ethical too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, better than some of the, better than me.
Yeah.
So then you have to get into this thing of processing through, well, then what does my faith, not what does it give me or what value does it bring, but rather how does it point me towards a greater understanding of the God of the universe, which ultimately is the perpetual novelty, the person who has made everything, for which I appreciate. So it goes back to Paul and Barnabas's address to the people at, I think it was Lystra, who, when they want to make them Zeus and Hermes, they say, God who's given us good food to eat and drink from heaven. They point to the goodness of life in order to understand the God who exists and who died for their sins. And I think that's a good jumping off point for a secular nation, but Christian community hopefully would be something that the world would look at and say we want. The second thing that you said, Sam, which I think is really important to remember, and I think in the Agape crew / missionary endeavor, we tend to forget it's not the size of the community that matters. It's the content. And I don't mean right content. I mean Jesus. I don't mean, do you believe in, what kind of baptism do you believe or whatever else? Sure, there are important doctrinal conversations we need to have, but I just mean Jesus. And I think we tend to, or I tend to, Garrick and I have talked about this some before, we tend to place incorrect value on numbers. And we tend to think we're losing the argument because there may be so few. Or we're quote unquote losing society, or I don't know how you would put it. There's a million different ways, but it's at the end of the day, it's this Jesus guy who's really important.
It's an intention, isn't it? To because it's quantitable. You can actually touch how many people, as it were.
Yeah.
So it's easier for us to measure the success or failure in numbers. How many people showed up? That's not different to church ministry. Now that I'm exposed to doing a placement on churches, I see that how many people showed up. And yesterday, for instance, I opened a church and we were counting how many people were coming in. There is some value in that. And really, sometimes it helps us to gauge, is it really worth it, the effort, time, money, to devote all that into this? In this case, we're dealing with people's lives. We're dealing with one case even sometimes. And that's worth it. That's worthwhile. But it's very easy, isn't it, to fall in that temptation. I fall in that very often. We look at everywhere. How many people liked my picture? How many people saw my story? It's just a quantitative thing that because we can measure it, we must be successful or we must be failing because of that. It's really a temptation, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we see that in the Bible too. I mean, the census that the people of Israel passed, we need to know how many people in Israel there are. Because God said, no.
Right.
You don't need to. You need to depend on me. It's just a temptation of saying, if I know that I'm succeeding, I can push up and push forward with the efforts and the pain, as opposed to saying, if I can trust in the one who's calling me, then I can keep on going. And it's very difficult. I fall that every day, really.
Yeah. I do too.
That was very profound, Barrett, because we've been talking about this a lot, but Sam used the biblical verse there to flip that clearly onto what are you trusting in? Are you trusting in numbers?
Mm-hmm.
and our abilities, or are we trusting in God ultimately? And knowing that sometimes God does give us walks through the desert, or much harder things. One quick comment. I wanted to go back real quick on the church as community. And so I just throw it out there. I don't know if I really agree with this, but the church feels that one of the few communities in the world that is literally for everyone. It is never, which is one of the great things about the Christian faith, in the sense of it is a community that predisposes, it's for everyone. There is no one that is excluded from it. Obviously, we're talking about faith in Christ, but anyone can come. And so I wonder if that makes it different. And then I also wonder if it makes it different in that it is also a reconciling community. So it can bring in whatever person who as we live in a world where you can be excluded by simply saying the wrong thing on Twitter, or by having a picture from a long time. And some of those things are really bad things. But what you see in our society is not an ability to go, hey, you messed up, let's forgive you and let's bring you back into the community. And I think the church is clearly a community that says, no, you messed up. Our striving, our desires for you to rejoin and be a part of the community. And then Sam, I did want to ask you about liturgy, because you're someone who, ever since I've known you, has somehow beautifully managed to use liturgy, even in campus ministry. And even in Spain, you were able to use it in evangelism, but also in discipleship with certain types of students, who came with a hunger. So it's a bigger question in Europe. Do you see that as a continued future for that, as an ability to draw people in? I'm particularly interested, obviously, in young people, but I've seen, I know people like Jesus and Alberto, who you've worked with, where, the liturgy was important to them at some level for them, for their growth, for their discipleship. So I kind of want to throw that out too, because I know you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I love liturgy, and I do aspire one day to become a liturgist. I love that. So I'm very biased. But I do take the word liturgy more the Greek origin of worship, an act of worship, more than, we sit down, we get up, we say these words now, and now we read the Bible, and then we move on, and then we lift up the Bible and kiss it, and all. That is the rubrics, and that's very useful sometimes, but not always. And so understanding liturgy in a broad sense, I think, is paramount for the livelihood of the church. Without liturgy, without worship, the church dies. Because in that worship, there's prayer. In that worship, there's adoration to God. And we are most human, really. But more concretely, to the type of fixed structures of set and written prayers and collects, as we call it in the Church of England, and things like that, and readings, I find this venues for it. Of course, the ecclesiology of the parish, of our community, will determine what kind of liturgy you will use. But it does help to understand the need for worshiping in a community, and then on that basis, yes, I think there is room for even that most strict and most traditional ones. There are, even to this day, services done in Latin, and no one speaks Latin unless you are really one of the weirdos like my kids who are actually being educated. But it's very rare, and yet there are people who feel drawn to that. The beauty of the church, as you said, is so inclusive that it is also inclusive in ways of worship. And I was, before meeting you, I was meeting with someone, and I was telling this person that there are times in my life that I do need the blast out loud music of a worship that looks a lot like a concert, more than what I'm used to seeing a service on Sundays. And I do need that sometimes in a 45 minutes expository preaching. And some other times I just need the quietness, contemplative silence of silence, really, or just some chants that repeat on and on the same truths that God has revealed to me today and tomorrow. So I think there's room for that. The problem I think that I can see in churches overall, really, is that we get fixated and these patterns fossilize. And so it works today, let's do it tomorrow, and 100 dear times, it's going to be continued that way. And so we fail to understand what St. Augustine of Hippo used to say, semper reformanda, right? Always reforming, even in our worship style, because we are not the same tomorrow than we are today. And so sometimes this certain people group, like youth, they do need other type of styles for worship, not because this previous one is wrong. It's just because in their surrounding, perhaps they don't have any other analogous style than to that one. So say, well, why even preserve that? Why can I not have more of a concert like? Or I use it that because it's the one that is most alien to me. But in the same way, at home here, for instance, in my house, we do use liturgy. I use incense, even for a morning prayer. I use my kneeling chair and all that. I even put my cassock now that we are in lockdown. And we use that at home. So it becomes a second nature for us. It's a normal thing for us as a family. When we go to church, my kids are used to that so much that it's not just a priest with fancy dresses. It is actually a bigger family praying in the same way. So the problem that I can find sometimes with liturgies is that the fossilized one are not reproduced elsewhere in our lives. And so it encourages that distancing from, is this really helpful to me? Does that make sense at all? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it does. Sam, are you familiar with, there's a guy writing from the States, or he's actually Canadian, but James K. A. Smith.
Rings a bell, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, he's written wrote a 3-series book, Desiring the Kingdom, Imagining the Kingdom, and Awaiting the Kingdom, I think. And he talks a lot about the use of liturgy and how we need to be reconnected with it. He's not Anglican. I believe he's Reformed. Yeah, I think so. He teaches at Calvin College, but anyway, he's really kind of awakened that again in the broader evangelical community, because he's really good on apologetics and stuff. And one of the things that he points out is just the idea of, if you think we don't have liturgy in our everyday life, we do. Every time you go to the mall, every time one of the things that we had been talking about in our church recently was the idea of giving and the need to form our worship through our giving. And we as a leadership were talking about the fact that, every week I go to the supermarket and I lay my money down and I orient my heart towards the grocery store, in my stomach and food. And I need opportunities during my week in order to orient my giving and my heart towards the Lord through my giving. But then there's also the aspect of, we do things in our everyday life. You were talking about changing up things that you do. There are these are more spiritual practices. So they're not necessarily liturgy, but they're liturgy in the sense of worship. I've noticed, I've been implementing certain silence and solitude and just different things throughout my life, but and I'm a person who likes variety. So maybe this is just my personality, but I was noticing even today on my walk, I had started a certain number of routine of things that had really produced some incredible, I would say, worship before the Lord over the past few months. And I noticed today, wait a second, I'm just going back to this because the well that I drank of, it was really good water one day, but is this really what my heart is needing? And so now I feel like I'm learning to attune myself to even the needs of the moment of my own worship. So kind of one of those things, am I needing silence and solitude right now? Or am I needing that, 45-minute worship, extravaganza? Am I needing to get on my knees before the Lord? Am I needing to have contemplative prayer versus, petition or whatever else it might be? And I think that liturgy seems to be one of those things that actually is really great, because it does afford, there is so much variety. The church, and evangelical Christianity in particular, threw a lot of baby out with the bathwater, forgetting that a lot of, specifically Catholic Church, but also Anglican Church, a lot of the liturgy that was created within it was there for a reason. And we just, when we reformed, we threw a lot of it out without good reason, just because it was connected to something. There's a lesson there right now, even for the moment of fighting for social justice around the world. We need to be careful not to throw out so much baby with the bathwater. There's a lot of junk there that we need to get rid of, but there's also, we need to be careful not to throw out so much. Anyway, that's a completely different comment. Back to the worship part of things.
It's good. And I was just thinking, there was some reason behind it. Sometimes that when it gets so fossilized, it becomes idolatry.
Yeah.
Eventually, when you say, well, we have to do this, we have to do it. Well, do we have to really? And does everyone has to do it? Well, no, maybe not. So it really gave all of the liturgical churches also a spectrum of saying, well, maybe we actually being a bit forceful. So it's useful as well to know that and it forces also to appreciate, even in the liturgical calendar, the different seasons. It's like, well, no, we don't have to do it the same way all the time, even within liturgy. So it used to playing devil's advocate. They really said, enough with this, let's go to the backbone and that's it. Let's put some mid in it. But there was the reason as well. They were seeing so much of idolatry as well.
Right.
Within reason, say, let's not do any of that, because our brothers and sisters can fall into this idolatry very easily. Rather than saying, let's educate the congregation of saying, this is as far as we can go. And this is how much we can be enriched with thinking of a season now of repentance, speaking of during Lent, or now, for instance, that we are in ordinary time. It's a time of expanding on normal things. I actually, as you were talking, I picked up a book that I thoroughly enjoyed, The Liturgy of the Ordinary by Tish Harrison Warren. And that book was very interesting in that it really does apply to our daily routines. It's very beautifully written, so I recommend reading it. But it's really brilliant in that way to understand that liturgy goes beyond the church on Sundays.
Yeah,
and it's everywhere.
I wonder, as we live more in a world of chaos and, well, I mean, not for everybody, but in a world where there's a lot going on, if that liturgy is something that could even draw people back in. Obviously, as Christians, it's something where I think you see a lot of people move in that direction because of the need to find balance, and a broader connection to the body of Christ, but also a broader connection to what God's doing day to day. But I'm wondering if also it's something that would eventually call non-Christians as something to not to call their attentions, but to say something. There's order in some sense here. There's an ability for God to speak into your life and create order out of chaos, and part of that is in liturgy or church calendar, whatever you'd want to kind of develop that. I'm interested in that as well.
Garrick, I think you make a really good point. It's because it's actually secular or pagan liturgies are making a rise. I would say pagan liturgies. So where I live, there are these ancient Viking holy places. Okay, so I run by one every morning. It's the ancient Viking burial grounds, and then there's another one at a different part of town that's this sacred valley where they used to have fertility rite ceremonies and wedding ceremonies. And there is actually groups of people who dress up like Vikings, go out there and perform these ceremonies. Because I think in a secular world, there is an aching for some kind of connection with a deeper past. And liturgy has an ability to do that. And they're looking for secular or pagan liturgies in order to infuse life with meaning. So I do think that it goes into that perpetual novelty situation where you're looking for something to be moored to be rooted to, and to also to explain something that is bigger than yourself. Mindfulness is a sense of some kind of liturgy or some kind of spiritual practice. There's a ton of things out there. So low church, I don't know this. I don't want to beat up low church because there's a lot of really great things about it, but there is a sense there where it is a good thing to be connected to the past, but also traditions that were developed for good reason, that we can pass on to our kid. And Sam, I think you're exactly right, though. When it becomes so rote as we're doing it because this is what we've always done, or this is what the institution says we have to do, it does become idolatry. But as a, American who grew up in a low church situation, it's very easy for me to go, yeah, Catholics and Anglicans, they have their pontiff, or they have their bishops or whatever.
Right.
But even in low church evangelical Protestantism, we have our pontiffs.
Absolutely.
Their names are Piper and Keller, and
Yeah.
we attach authority, and okay, my church does it this way or whatever else. So it seems the human experience. So anything can become idolatry because when we attach it that way. Because
it's our heart desire to worship.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we place it in different places, but that's not something new that we do. We've been doing it all along.
Well, it's our heart's desire also to make something formulaic, right? So I think idolatry, in some sense, this isn't the best explanation, but becomes when we treat anything, when we treat God like a vending machine. Right. This is my coin. I want X to come out, and that was the sin. That was the perspective that Job's friends had. They all had that friend. You put the wrong coin in, or you forgot to put the coin in, or whatever else. And that's not the message of God. Cannot be controlled in that way. When you go to him on that grounds, you actually you'll end up missing him altogether. And so that then becomes idolatry.
Right.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
Well, so Sam, what is your hope? Is the Lord in the next year supposed to graduate in a year from now or so?
Yes.
Lord willing, coronavirus notwithstanding. What is your hope long term, and where do you hope to follow the Lord and minister and everything else? Not just the details of it, but kind of big vision stuff. Where does your heart beat?
I caught myself by surprise, really, talking to my spiritual director recently, in an attempt of desperation, really, of trying to convey conflicting ideas in my heart. I was saying, I just want to love people. And I don't think it came in a shallow way. It came from groaning in my heart to the point of, with time later of reflection, I think it was something that the Lord was tapping in me already. It was a godly thing, a calling from God to love people, which is very hard for me because sometimes I follow the path of judgment, especially if other people don't have my same theology. It's very easy for me to go that route. So I like to think that in the long run, as a priest, I will have more opportunities to encounter more people, more different to me than I have already. And in that confrontation, be able to put themselves first and not me. It's very big and very vague as well. Yeah. But I really, deep down, that's what I would like to do in my ministry. And that, of course, the latent heart of it is that people may see Christ through me in that way, in my dying, in my sacrificial act, in my rejoicing with them, and in whatever way we're going together. And I would like to do that in a parish, really. I love that. I love parish ministry. And I've been more and more growing into it. And now that I'm exposed to it, I absolutely love it. It brings me back to moments at Ligonde, at La Fuente del Peregrino, which is the inn that Agape owns to host pilgrims at the Camino de Santiago. And it brings me back to the 3,000 average daily pilgrims that we encounter there and know their story and get to know them and have a little bit of an influence in their Emmaus road as well as them in me. I want more of that, really. I tasted it. I loved it because I was able to engage with people, but ultimately with God in that moment. And I want more of that. I don't want to be a lone Christian, as it were. Yeah. I wasn't before, but now I seek that even more now that I'm here.
I think that's awesome. It's there is really something powerful with being in a position where what I'll call faithful presence. That's La Fuente, right? It's faithful presence. It's we're going to show up. We're going to love the people who walk by our door. Luckily, you're in a position where there's a lot of people walking by your door, right?
Oh, yes.
So finding people finding people to love in that situation is rather easy. So that doesn't mean sometimes you got to go find some people and usher them in, right? You got to invite them into the door. But the
ones you want to come will not come. You have to
go. That's right.
Or meet them where they are rather than more than
right.
15.
But the sense of just faithful presence. We say here in Sweden, because there was a paradigm shift for me. I don't know when it was. I mean, I was still in Central Asia at the time, under my first director. And at the time, kind of, I don't want to say just beginning, but it was coming on my radar, this idea between good news, good deeds. And our director at the time, a guy named Eric Schenkel, who eventually ran the Jesus Film Project, an incredible guy. He would always say, people tend to put, good news on one side of the spectrum and good deeds on the other. And you're kind of, which one do you do sort of thing. And he kind of put it as a quadrant, where you have two axes and you're trying to plot basically, look, you want to be good news and good deeds all the time. And the way that we put it in Sweden is we say, we want to be bold with word and bold in relationship. And people can tell when you're trying to be, when they're a project or when you're trying to be a faithful presence in their life. Yeah. Like you've got something really good in this Jesus guy. People can sense that, but they know when you're trying to force them into that versus when you're there to be present. The La Fuente really hit that home for me recently. Cause I don't know if you know this, Sam, I recently walked with Garrick in September and some other guys, the Camino. And it is a beautiful thing and a beautiful illustration of faithful presence, that ministry in particular. So, man, if that's what the parish ministry means, may the Lord bless you in it.
Thank you.
May He give you the grace to walk that, because it is so incredibly important.
Yeah, it's needed.
Yeah. Garrick, any final parting thoughts here?
Well, I have one that's it's a total rabbit trail. It's about a cultural moment
apropos.
In 30 years ago, I think today or yesterday, was the release of No Depression by the band Uncle Tupelo. One of the it's a band and a because they broke up like 3 years after this, but then formed
Eric,
Wilco and Sunvolt.
You've currently lost all our listeners.
Yeah, but it was not a well-known album and didn't do well, but it was probably one of the most influential albums in what would become Americana or alternative country music. So you talk to anyone who plays that music, listens to that music, in the last 30 years, that's one of the signposts. So I would recommend going out. It's just listen to some of that. It's a great album. It really is. It's a fusion of country, folk, and punk rock. And at the time was considered groundbreaking and still is considered groundbreaking. There's been a bunch of writing about it and interviewing of other artists and musicians saying how influential it is. So No Depression by Uncle Tupelo, great band. If you like Wilco, Sunvolt, those bands, that's what was the band they were before everything else. So
wow,
that's just
I was unaware, and now I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, check it out. It'll liven up your day.
Eric, this is why you get paid the big bucks, buddy.
This is why they bring me in on this podcast. This is why our producers have brought me in.
Yeah. All right. Well, Sam Perez, thank you, sir. The Lord bless you. Keep safe in England. Please say hi to your wife for us. And until the next time I'm in Cambridge, we'll have to look you up.
You must. Yes, of course. Absolutely.
We'll go grab a pint or something.
It would be great. Yes.
Thanks, Sam. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Great.
It was a privilege to be here and to talk cool stuff together. Really, I missed that.
Oh, well, anytime, man. You know where to find us. Well, guys, thanks for a great podcast, and until the next one, adios.